Well, thank you so much. What a great honor to be able to present with you all. And wow, what an experience. How many people feel recentered now after Stacy's performance? Unbelievable. And I don't know how many other people other than me developed a new life's goal, which for me is going to be to sing Dona Nobis Pacem with Eric Whitacre and a couple 100,000 other people. That's or whatever song he creates that's going to be even superior. Anyhow, these are really wonderful experiences. And I guess one of the questions we tried to address in the NEA Research Lab, if we can have the next slide. I'm very lucky to have some support from the NEA to have one of the research labs at UCLA, where our goal is to try to develop an arts impact measurement system. So given the kinds of experiences that you just had with Eric Whitacre, that you have with Stacy L, I guess the question is, how do we describe the experience that you just had? I mean, does anybody have an adjective that they'd like to use to describe what just happened to you and what you experienced during those periods? Wow, okay. That's good. Anything else? Beautiful. Okay. It's fantastic, yeah. So, however, we just got a sampling of words, but is that enough for us to aggregate the data so we can make a compelling case to Congress and other legislators? I've been very lucky to work with a team, including Armin Arevian, who's been working on community-based participatory research to gather data. Ariana Anderson, an amazing scientist who analyzes vocal signals in order to extract the emotional meaning of those signals. So for example, she developed an app called Chatter Baby that figures out whether the baby is happy, angry, or sad just by listening to its cry. And she uses, the fancy tools of artificial intelligence and machine learning to do all that. But anyhow, she's working on our team to analyze acoustic signals. And then Sophie Lawrence, our incredible coordinator, who's somewhere around in here. There she is. Yay, Sophie. She's been, running the show. She helped, thank goodness, tells me what to do. And Diana Harold, an expert in music in her own right, has joined the team to help us all out. So anyhow, we have been working to try to develop an arts impact measurement system. And if I have the next slide, it's really fascinating what has already been done. I want to at least acknowledge some of the work that's already been done. NEA commissioned, major study to try to understand what we can do to measure the impact of the arts. I think that all that work has gone about identifying certain psychological constructs or concepts, things that happen in our minds when we are exposed to the arts. And that's what the prior Wolf Brown report highlighted. And what struck me in reading that report and other scholarly work on the topic is that a lot of these psychological impacts resonate with a huge amount of prior research on psychological well-being and what are the different dimensions of psychological well-being. And there's a huge history. This little wheel here highlights some of the concepts, and you heard about them from other speakers today, and people talking about the experiences. These concepts include things like self-acceptance, purpose in life, environmental mastery, that sense of autonomy, positive relationships with others, personal growth experiences. All of these features have been identified as the components of psychological well-being, and I think they have also been identified as the targets of different kinds of arts. And so our brainstorm was to think, how can we capture some of these elements in ways that are as simple as possible and that can be applied at scale, including to large audiences. And if we have the next slide. Yeah, I know no one is really happy unless you get a structural equation model, and I left out a number of the mathematical equations that go behind trying to understand this. But in brief, what we were really hoping to achieve is coming up with a way to try to understand the mechanisms that lead to health outcomes, beneficial health outcomes, since that's what a lot of our funders, including Congress, are quite interested in. It's one thing that everyone understands is the cost and value of health benefits. So we want to understand Well, if we hypothesize that health outcomes are largely mediated by psychological well-being and those things that impact psychological well-being, well, we could actually study how much of the variation in health outcomes are due to shifts in psychological well-being. And then if we could think about, okay, well, what are the actual psychological mechanisms? What are the things we can measure that go into psychological well-being? And one of the things that we've discovered from that literature is that if we account for positive and negative affect, this is one kind of psychological construct, and social connectedness, just those two factors alone explain a lot of the variance in psychological well-being. Indeed, just positive and negative affect accounts for about half of the variance in psychological well-being. So increasing your positive affect, decreasing your negative affect. And then social connectedness, as you increase social connectedness, that too can account for about half of the variation in psychological well-being. And if we think about, well, what is the known impact of the arts on those factors like positive, negative affect, and social connectedness? Well, there we find that 20 to 30% of the variation in psychological well-being can be accomplished by arts experiences. You probably had some arts experiences right here that resulted in a greater than 30% impact on your psychological well-being, just from hearing these incredible performances by Eric and by Stacy. So, and God forbid if we get Renee coming to sing again, you're going to go up to 80% of the variance in psychological well-being is probably going to be explained. So what this means, if we do the math and multiply this through, and then if we figure out, just let's say there's our economy runs at about $4.5 trillion. If we could, just for health spending, then we could actually show that the arts are worth about $225 billion a year. And now how much do we get? How much does the NEA get? Is it 200 billion? Should it be bumped up a little bit? Huh? Is it less than 225 billion? just kidding. But yeah, I'm just thinking of what we could do if we focused on these things. But the question is, well, how do we demonstrate that we can achieve these kinds of gains? So if we have the next slide. Yeah, our goal was to do a couple of things. One is to develop a database of all the different kinds of measurement tools that people have been using, and to compile that. And what we've managed to do is assemble of all these different kinds of scales of psychological well-being and et cetera, et cetera. We've found about 180 of them and pulled them together into a scale bank. And then we got all of the individual items or questions that people can ask on those scales. We got more than 5,000 items. And then pulled together also an evidence bank. Well, what's the evidence that each one of those scales and each one of those items actually plays a role in measuring the things that we think they're measuring? So this is like so geeky, but our hope is that by having this kind of database available, it can provide a substrate that people can use to begin to converge on shared measurement methodology in the arts. And if we can get that data together and share the data, then we can actually make really compelling arguments across many thousands and thousands of different demonstration projects. So for folks who'd like a demo at some point, you can look at that one, but I've got another demo for us right here, so don't worry about that QR code. But if you go to the next slide. We've piloted these kinds of methods with selected rating scales in a bunch of different projects. Interestingly, some of the ones that we've really enjoyed have focused on opera, and I'll come back to those. We've been able to work with the amazing Ken Wells, who is a master and founder of community-based participatory research and has written a number of operas about certain key social issues. Another really amazing project is the Drumming for Your Life project. We partnered with Stephen Angel, who's been supported by the County Department of Mental Health, working with patients with severe mental illness who are actually engaged in drumming projects. Another program in schools, Beyond the Bell, looking at students who are experiencing jazz music engagements in their after-school programs. We had the opportunity to work in the Sound Health Network with Indre and her colleagues. Also with the Big Picture, also with Indre, the Big Picture exhibition, an amazing art display up at the California Academy of Sciences. We've also, around the UCLA campus, focused on music interventions and moving art, and we've also mounted a project in dialysis where we're randomizing patients to receive either music, moving art displays, or treatment as usual, to see how this may help people who are engaged in dialysis treatment, which many of you may know is associated with significant time commitments, hours, 3 times a week, a great deal of pain, discomfort, and the comfort that can be provided by engaging in music or other kinds of art exposures we think is going to be quite valuable for that group. We're excited to be here today, and you're about to experience something that is another measurement project. You've already heard earlier today about a project that we're really excited to be mounting that's going to include Esperanza Spalding and her group in the Songwrites Apothecary Laboratory right here in LA, including the Music Center, and then we hope a bunch of our folks, colleagues at UCLA helping out. And then we've done myriad student projects. It's been really exciting. We've got teams of undergraduates who, you could imagine, the NEA Research Lab is like the most exciting project anybody could want to be part of, and Sophie does an amazing job of recruiting. We have a couple of our undergraduates right here, and they have just amazing ideas and boundless energy, and are going to change the world, thank goodness. So if we can have the next slide. Yeah, just to highlight some of the kinds of findings that come out of this work when we digest all the data. For example, this Ken Wells opera, the Veteran Journeys opera, it focused on veterans returning and the problems that are so heavily stigmatized. PTSD and housing instability. As we query people in our communities, it's striking how even people who have connections to veterans often feel uncomfortable. In terms of social interactions with people who have PTSD and housing instability, it's been an ongoing issue. And what we found is that by participating in this opera, we were able to show, with the kinds of ratings that you'll experience a little bit of, we are able to show a large increase in the willingness of people to engage with veterans who have PTSD or unstable housing. And also a large increase, even for those people who had personal experience with trauma, because they were already, we were sort of preaching to the choir, but even for those folks who already had comfort dealing with these issues, they showed an increased level of comfort. And we also showed that after the opera, the amount of engagement that they showed correlated with these ratings of positive affect, social connectedness, and arousal that we were able to obtain with this arts impact measurement system. And the next slide. We did a similar thing in another incredible opera developed by Ken Wells collaboratively with Ellen Sachs. I don't know how many people know Ellen Sachs' story, but she developed a severe mental illness, a psychotic disorder, was already on the path to becoming a brilliant lawyer, but her struggle with the psychotic disorder, a schizophrenia-like illness, and her recovery is documented through this opera. And this also, severe mental illness, of course, is very heavily stigmatized, but the ratings were able to show that there were significant increases in positive affect, arousal, and social connectedness correlated with willingness to socialize with people who had psychotic disorders. So the kind of social cohesion and the messages that were contained in these artworks and the engagement of the audience in that work was really able to move the needle for those folks, raising hope that similar interactions and similar impacts of the art could be realized in other settings as well. So the next slide. Yeah. So our fantasy is that by having this kind of big database and making it into a system that enables people to use it in measurements, what we can do is have what we refer to as the open aims protocol. So here's the overall idea. We've got a big bank of items. Any arts organization or entity anywhere can go online and design their own project, say whether they want to do baseline assessments, follow-up assessments, whatever they've got, and then select out the measures that they're interested in. If they want to measure social connectedness, great, we've got measures for that. If they want to measure awe, we can assess that. They pick the measures that they want to use. They go about deploying them in their arts event, gather the data, and then as the data are collected, they go to inform a growing national or international database. So all those data will be available to anybody who wants to analyze them at any time. And they'll help to inform future assessments. We can say, oh, this one worked at the LA Opera. This one worked at this other arts event. And as that database grows, it helps to build the database of evidence further, and iteratively, we build a new measurement infrastructure that everyone can use and that everyone can benefit from, and that we can use to persuade others that what we're doing really makes a difference. We can also then, with big data, can identify, oh, what are the things that really work the best, and what might we be able to tweak? What can we learn from the experience of others? Right now, most measurement in arts events are sort of one-off deals where people all have their own, sometimes brilliant, incredibly great ideas about what to measure, but then after that event, it disappears. We don't have a cumulative or aggregative method to make big data out of the kinds of work that's going on. So if we have the next slide. Yeah, let's try it out. With any technology, what could go wrong, right? You know, but I'd like, if you have smartphones. I think there's a decent number of people that probably have phones. I'm hoping this QR code is big enough. And if you're near the side, you can, move around a little bit to make sure you can get an image of this. And as a teaser, this is one of our assessment tools. It's what we call a color grid. We use it to measure affect and arousal, or any two dimensions. At the same time, you can just touch the screen somewhere, and it'll give you two-dimensional measures. So I see we've got at least 71 folks who've already gotten on board. This is fantastic. Okay, so let's go ahead and give it a whirl. Let's get to the next slide, which I believe is using this. Yeah, so here, this is a low-hanging fruit questions. How do you feel right now? And go ahead, you can just rate these different items: enthusiastic, nervous, inspired, distressed, sad, or happy. I'll tell you while you're thinking about responding, these are actually the measures that come from the positive and negative affect system. It's one of the most widely validated scales in the world. Just by giving 3 positive affect items and 3 negative affect items, we now have a pretty stable estimate of the positive and negative affect of this group. And I appreciate we're preaching to the choir, but these are darn good ratings. I can see that people are actually showing, high levels of positive and low levels of negative affect. So that's super reassuring. And we've already got, 57 responses. That is really incredible. And you see that wasn't that painful, right? Yeah, it hasn't already increased your levels of negative affect and reduced your levels of positive affect having to do this? All right, let's try another one, because these results look pretty stable to me. Here's another one. How do you feel right now? But these items, do you feel you belong, and you have a sense of togetherness with your peers? These are the classic items out of the social connectedness scale, and we've already used these kinds of scales, these items, enough times that we know that just by getting 2 responses here, we're already getting a stable and reliable gauge of each individual's social connectedness and feelings thereof. And again, these are really decent ratings. We already got more than 57 folks, so this is good news. Let's try the next item. Okay, now here, one of the things about the prior items is that they are locked down. I asked you to respond on a scale, so that's sort of locking in what you could say. But now, let's hear 3 words that describe how you feel right now, in your own words. You can pick any 3 words you want. So let's give you a moment to do that. And as you can see, we're creating a bit of a word cloud here, and it looks like grateful and inspired are already rising to the top. This is really fantastic. I can just tell you, when we get into the dark, smoke-filled rooms where we analyze the data. It's not really any smoke anymore, but smoke coming out of our brains as we try to analyze the data. But we can do all kinds of really cool, fancy statistics analyzing the semantic concepts that come out of these words, things like latent semantic analysis and cool things where we can figure out exactly what concepts were being expressed by people. But here I can see inspired, grateful, happy. This is really great news. What a great event. And we already got, 192 responses. Darn good. Okay, next item. Now, one of the things, here's an affect arousal grid. So, if you could rate how you felt before today's experiences and how you feel now, that would be neat. And the ratings go on a scale where from left to right, it's from negative to positive. So as you go, if you feel happier, you go more to the right. And if you feel more aroused, you go up to the top. So, wow, look at that. Yeah, we can see the before-after shift. They're still floating around a little bit. But it looks like there's been a net change. It's quite impressive. Already 38 responses, 43, 40. Look at that, we're almost about to hit 50. And look, I can assure you that with 50 responses, that is a significant shift in mood just by the events that you've experienced today. Now, if we can go to the next slide. I wanted to comment, I had the rare opportunity and honor to be able to talk to Stacy before we did this, and she just was chatting with her for about a half an hour about what her experience might do. And so then we were going through our 180 rating scales, I sort of know a lot of them, and try to figure out, well, what might resonate. And what we found is, she said, well, some of the stuff I'm doing is about self-regulation. And so I said, well, what about trying the music self-regulation scale, which we happen to have in the database. And so, here are the items. Do you feel that these kinds of factors have been influenced by the experience you had with Stacy? And we can already see Stacy looks like mission accomplished. You got what you were looking for. So it's really quite incredible. It's an example of how, with this large bank of different rating scales and items, that we can select out things and customize them for individual experiences. And so the next slide, which I think is one of the last ones, regarding the experiences you had today, did you experience time differently, sense of oneness with all things? This was derived from our conversation with Stacy, but I think it also applies incredibly to the work that Eric was talking about and how to be part of something greater. This is the awe experiences scale, one that we've deployed a decent number of times. People seem to love it. Here we can see that I think people have gotten a nice positive experience in that way. So I think there's one last slide. One of the key things we like to find out, and many arts entities want to know, is whether people got some takeaways from the experiences they've had. Is there something they feel they can use in the future? And so I just wonder if participating in today's experience has offered you something you could use in the future. And amazingly enough, we already have more than 60 responses with a nice positive response. So I'm really grateful to have the time to share these kinds of measurement tools with you. I hope they can be useful to some of you in the future. And is there a last slide? This slide says, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.